So next up we have Stephen Colbert. He's a literacy improvement teacher in Victoria. Stephen is a proud public government school teacher who has been teaching English, history and English as an additional language for 10 years. He is passionate about teacher collaboration, which he supports through organising teach meets, running #EduReading, which is an online academic reading group, being part of #AussieEd Twitter group, and taking groups of teachers to Cambodia to run teacher development workshops with teachers across borders Australia. He leverages technology to share teaching ideas and develops teachers through the Teachers Educational Review podcast and his own YouTube channel, Mr. Colbert's Teaching. He is especially interested in the future of education and the role of democracy within emerging technological futures. His presentation is called Video and Video Conferencing, Getting the Balance Right.
All right. Hello, lovely people. How are we all doing on this? Who even knows what day it is anymore? This slide is mostly filler because normally I introduce myself, but 7 minutes starts now, so let's see how we go. I thought this might be useful to some people. This month's EduReading article is by David Thornburg. It fits really well with Sue's previous 3 columns. He refers to them as primordial metaphors of the fireside, which is where you get direct instruction from the sage on the stage, the watering hole where you do sort of social engagement, and the cave, which fits quite neatly with the individual space, which is often, from the responses so far, this is where most people are lacking at the current time, because we just don't have enough time away from screens and time to reflect. And as we know, a lot of learning happens in the time when we're not actively involved in learning, but sort of reprocessing and forming new connections. I thought I'd give you a bit of a summary. I think if you're doing remote learning, you probably already know this stuff, so I'm just going to focus on video and video conferencing today. Asynchronous video is sort of my area. For the last 5 years, I've been making videos. I don't know why I picked this particular playlist, which is one of the least popular ones, but it's the one I've been working on recently. So my preference is always asynchronous video, and I'll try and explain why that is. If you're not using video in your teaching, I would suggest that these are the 3 easiest ways to start. Just click camera on your phone or on your laptop and get started. Record a meeting in Google or Microsoft or whatever your school uses. Or personally, what I use is something called OBS Studio that allows you to record slides in your face in the corner and do picture-in-picture and all that sort of fancy stuff. This is probably beyond the pale, so I'm going to fly over this pretty quickly. But once you've done those basics, these are the sort of things that I speak at conferences about, how you get more complicated with things using whiteboards, note streaming, classroom observation, the sort of stuff that Eddie Wu does. Surprisingly technically complicated when you think about sound and the fact that between your camera and you teaching, there's 25 plus students who have a tendency to make noise. But let's move on. So for mine, the 3 biggest challenges are engagement, collaboration, and connection with online learning. So a lot of my curriculum content was already done or set in the form of a video. And so my focus has very much been on these 3 things. Here's some literature that I'll skip through because I don't think it fits too neatly with what we're doing at the moment. And I find this a bit more useful. So basically, the 4 forms are down the side and the 3 problems are along the top of this little grid. I think asynchronous video is best for engagement and connection, and video conferencing is the best for connection and collaboration. So I would hope that that's what my colleagues are doing, and that's definitely something that I am trying to practice in my online teaching at the moment. So what that means is basically at the point where I'm about to begin to teach my class, I will quite often set them a small task to do independently, and I will stop the meeting because obviously, perhaps not obviously, but in my setting, you don't record student meetings, as I don't think you should, or show pictures of them and all those sort of things. So at that point, I would stop the meeting and I would instead record a video, often using the same software that I was in the meeting with. And the reason that I do that is issues of equity. Obviously, the digital divide is a massive topic that I can't get into here. But students with EAL backgrounds, students with a disability and so on, as well as processing speeds, they can speed up the video, slow it down, rewind, do it whenever they want. And a lot of the work that I do is about inclusion and inclusive practices, and so that's what I aim to do. Now, in terms of engagement, I'm going to skip over this, but one thing I've really enjoyed is my school's approach has been to keep basically marking kids present or not present, and so we use a platform called Microsoft Teams, but I'm sure everyone else will do more or less the same. So most teachers just ask their students, are you here? And they all say here, and then they mark them up on the roll. So I've just sort of been using social media-like strategies to kind of engage my students. So instead of just saying, hi, I'm here, I ask them, what was Shakespeare's best movie? Wrong answers only. What was the best book ever written? Wrong answers only, stuff like that. What'd you have for breakfast? What's the best thing you've cooked this month? If you could, would you rather have 4 arms or 4 legs for the rest of your life? Just stupid stuff like that, which I think normally we would do in face-to-face interactions with kids, but that's really been stripped away. And so most of the time that I spend video conferencing with my students is doing doofy stuff like this. This was my favorite activity of this week. So in EAL, this is a very common practice, but it might not be in other areas, so I thought I might share it. Basically, one person has full knowledge of what they're looking at, and they're describing it to their peers. So these work on their oral language, their oracy, and their speaking and listening skills. The one on the left was my favorite. So even as we were drawing, I think I'd worked out what we were drawing, but even still, like the actual images that came out were pretty quite a long way from what was being described. And a lot of that is the skills of the EAL learners and the precision with which they can describe things. And that in and of itself is a life skill, and obviously just building on literacy more generally. So that was a really fun one. Collaboration is the big one. So already in the chat, we've been talking about collaboration leading up to here. And this is just some research pulled from a meta study that I've just learned is a couple of years old now. But looking at collaboration, and it basically finds that for online learning, collaborative learning is even more important than individual participation. So that for me, and obviously haven't deeply researched into this, so I'm only talking about 4 or 5 papers that I've read that seem to confirm what I was noticing in my classes. And so the obvious thing to do is to put kids into collaborative groups, breakout spaces, usually around a shared document, but it can also be more open. So my EEL students this morning were sharing aspects of their cultural background to their peers in a sort of intercultural connection type activity. And there was no document. I wasn't asking them to take notes because they were working on their oracy skills. I got 30 seconds left. The greatest success I've had is with Socratic circles. So you have some students having a discussion, you have an outer circle, which obviously is virtual, and the students are listening, and then they report back on the kind of pro-social habits within the inner circle, and then they reverse and do the opposite. That's been especially interesting, and it's really good to see students relying a lot less on physical cues, because there's a tendency to do, that sort of thing by students. And so in an online space has been a lot better. So just to round it back out, let's go back to the start so I can remember what was the point of this. My point is basically that to get the balance right, as much as possible, keep your direct instruction in the form of a video that can be altered and paused and such, and use video conferencing for connection. That's what I found to be the most beneficial. And that is my time. Thank you very much. Happy to chat with anyone about any and everything.
Thank you so much, Stephen. There was a request for your contact details on the chat, so I'll put the Twitter on there. If there's anything else you'd like to share, please pop it in the chat. But thanks for sharing so many ideas on how you use video and the different tools, and also some strategies that you've been using in your classroom. It's just that was just great to see, and some ideas that we can all take away. Brilliant.